Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, The Winning Mindset with Jeremy Snape. Well done. Happy Friday. You've made it to the weekend. It's the end of the first week back after Christmas, so well done. And thank you so much for making the time to join us this lunchtime. My name is Gemma Sole. I'm a director at the School for CEOs, and I'm hosting the podcast, the webinar today. My role is quite diverse at the school. I'm a member of the coaching panel. I deliver some of our programs, and I also get involved in fun and exciting things like this webinar and also hosting our leadership podcast. So delighted to be with you today and also to introduce our guest speaker. I'm not going to steal his thunder because I know Jeremy's going to tell you a little bit about his background shortly, but we have with us today a former international English cricketer and a psychologist, and also the founder and managing director of Sporting Edge. And Jeremy's going to tell you a little bit more about his background and Sporting Edge shortly. But before I do pass over, I'll just go through a little bit of housekeeping, tell you a little bit about the School for CEOs as well. So the School for CEOs, firstly, we are specialists in executive education. A number of you who are joining today are familiar with our programs. Perhaps you've been on one or you've worked with one of our coaches. But we specialize in really pragmatic and practical lessons, and we support leaders through significant leadership transitions, whether that is through a one-day leadership masterclass or a 6 to 9 month leadership development intervention. We offer a really broad range of solutions that will help you step into roles with greater responsibility. In terms of housekeeping, this is an interactive webinar, so please ask us lots of questions throughout, and we've set aside plenty of time at the end to pose those to Jeremy. If you'd like to ask a question, the way to do that is if you wiggle your mouse at the moment and look at the bottom of your screen, you should see a box pop up saying Q&A. Send your questions to me directly, so to the host or the panelist, and I will ask as many of these to Jeremy at the end as I can. We also have a poll for you, so we encourage you to get involved in that. And if you're on the phone, you won't be able to select your option, but just answer the poll in your head and try and get involved that way too. Finally, I'm recording the webinar today, so if there's anything that you want to revisit afterwards, I'll make sure that you all receive a link to that as well. So without further ado, welcome, and I'm now going to pass over to Jeremy, who is our guest speaker today. Welcome, Jeremy.
Hi, Gemma, and thanks very much for that brilliant introduction, and welcome to 2020. I hope everyone's had a great festive break and are ready to come in and attack the new year. I mean, I think our mindset's going to be absolutely critical to that. So I'm really pleased to be able to share a few insights from my career that can hopefully help you in yours in the coming months. So I'll just make sure that my slides are ready to do their business. So yeah, as we've just heard a little bit there, my cricketing career I'll give you an insight into, but this area of the winning mindset has really been a fascination for me, both through my cricketing career, but also in my work outside of that. So I'm going to share a few insights in how that came about. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the role of leaders in navigating and managing teams and organizations through change and uncertainty, which is a huge area of interest and challenge for our clients at the moment. We're going to look at how leaders can empower their teams and create a learning environment to make sure we're agile and responsive to these changes. And then just some insights around future-proofing your own personal career and your business. And as Gemma mentioned at the beginning, I'd be thrilled to get some really tough questions to end the week. So please do type them into the chat facility and send those through so that I can make sure that I'm answering, with as much value for you today in this webinar. So just a little bit of background then to set the context. I spent my first 19 years in a career as a professional and international cricketer, very much the journeyman pro, not the superstar by any stretch. But I think when Sky Sports did my career highlights reel, it lasted about 40 seconds, which I don't think I'd even got the whole family sat down to watch it when it finished. But there were some great moments. Man of the match on my England debut, hitting the winning runs there in the 2020 final for Leicester, and winning 10 trophies. So a really great opportunity to test myself against the world's best players. And occasionally it all sparked together, and I had brilliant performances, and some of those helped me to get picked for England, which was a great privilege, and the chance to play against the world's best players. But that picture bottom left is probably the confession rather than the boast, and that's me choking in front of 120,000 people at Eden Gardens in Calcutta, a massive game where England were desperate to win against India, and the pressure was building and building. And my first mistake was running out in that cacophony of noise, running out Freddie Flintoff, the only hero that could win the game for England. So that wasn't great. And I was left in the middle of that pitch all on my own, having those negative thoughts, thinking, oh shit, what's going to happen next? And then I played the worst shot of my cricketing career, which wasn't a great stage to do it. And then walked off to the pavilion thinking, who played that shot? What was that? It was a schoolboy error. And I guess that shameful failure became a catalyst for the second half of my career, because I started to realize that, the mental side of our performance is absolutely pivotal. It's probably the biggest differentiator between our best and worst performance. Yet so few people understand the mental game, and certainly there's very little coaching and focus on it. So I became fascinated about how elite performers think and what kind of habits and strategies they've got to deliver in high performance. So that failure in 2002, I did get over. I played for England again and had some success after it. But I did go on and study a master's degree in sports psychology at Loughborough University, because I really wanted to start to work and coach some of the best teams in the world. So that master's degree gave me great access into some very high profile jobs. So the first one was bottom left, working with Professor Shane Warne with the Indian Premier League. Absolutely amazing experience with the billionaires of India, buying the best players in the world in an auction and throwing them together into a brand new team that we got to start from scratch. And we actually won that first Indian Premier League in 2008 with the cheapest team. So it was a real sort of fairy tale there, and a triumph of not only individual courage and skill, Warney's genius leadership, but also we built a really strong and courageous sort of team culture there that really got us through that first tournament. Then that gave me a chance to work with the South African cricket team, because Graham Smith was the captain of South Africa, and he'd been in the Rajasthan Royals team in India, and they went from number 4 to number 1 in the world. Again, a fascinating project to work with a really diverse cultural group of 6 or 7 different cultures within that team, and to help to keep them at the top of the world rankings. That led into supporting Eddie Jones with the England rugby team for 18 months when he came over to England. And again, an incredible experience to work with one of the world's best coaches. Eddie's a trained educator. He's obviously a top rugby player, but a teacher as well. So that educational environment was fascinating, as well as the physical demands and the strategic demands that the players were put under. And obviously they fell just short of winning the World Cup in the recent final. And then over the last 5 or 6 years, I've been on the board of the LMA, which supports the Premier League and all the managers through the UK and in the top leagues of football, designing and delivering a lot of their leadership interventions. And that's given me real access to those very top performers, having the chance to interview the likes of Jose Mourinho, Sir Alex Ferguson, some brilliant people there, Pep Guardiola, and getting a chance to get inside their mind and try and understand how they not only think clearly themselves, but create a high performance system for their teams. So this first background in my own career, and then this second career coaching and supporting some of these top athletes, has given me access to really get inside the mind of the human stories. This is a picture of one of our interviews with Stuart Broad, who's recently been out in South Africa, winning that second test in Cape Town. So really getting a chance to ask them the questions about their own performance that are going to be so transferable across into other walks of life. So over the last 10 years since retiring, I've created an incredible digital library of 2-minute video insights from whether it's the head of Cirque du Soleil, Sir Dave Brailsford. We've got brilliant professors of ethics or heads of business schools, Formula One experts, and some of the world's best coaches. So that sort of curated leadership insight is available for all of our clients in digital format, which we use in conferences or digital learning programs. So, I'm really thrilled, first of all, to meet those people, but also to share it with people so that it can make them more successful and resilient in their own organization. So those are some of the insights I'm going to be pulling on through this webinar today. And this idea of insight-led learning, which is our approach at Sporting Edge, to not just hit you with a lot of theory. I think a lot of the time everybody knows what to do, but it's often these human stories, these real personal insights that give you the sort of personal challenge and frustrations and sort of risks that people need to take. And when you hear those lived experiences blended with the practical tools from psychology and the research, then that's when it really starts to land. So that's the way I usually present in keynotes or digital learning, and that's the format we're going to take today. Now, I've seen a brief overview of the list of people we've got in the community today, so it's great to have you all with us. Lots of different people from insurance, financial services, FMCG. I can see lots of different consultancy groups as well. So really excited to share these insights, and that mirrors absolutely the client network that I'm used to working with. So my view is that sort of whichever industry you're in, your mindset will be absolutely critical to your performance. And those are some of the core transferable skills that we'll look at across these three key domains. Now, we haven't got a huge amount of time today, so I'll be digging into this individual mindset around personal resilience and coping with change. And then we'll look at some of the leadership attributes that we need as we move forward into 2020. And also this idea of scaling and future-proofing our organizations and teams. So that's the overview that we're going to pick on first. And all of these insights come from our research into the winning mindset for leaders. We interviewed around 40 HR directors a couple of years ago and some senior leaders to try and understand what are the key attributes that leaders are going to need in the future. And we've built this model with 12 key drivers of leadership that have formed our keynote speeches and also a digital program that we're going to share some information with you with after this WebEx. So the elements to think about are, first of all, how we lead ourselves, how we get ourselves right, how we lead the teams around us, the other people, how we coach them, and really start to get an inclusive environment within our teams and empower them. And then also how we scale that up and start to lead the organization. So those are the three levels that the winning mindset for leaders considers. So just as a start, I think Gemma mentioned at the beginning, we're going to take a quick poll. So I'm really interested just to give me a sense for the kind of challenges that you're facing live in your businesses today. Which of these is the most pressing issue for you currently? Is it your own personal resilience and well-being? Is it navigating change and uncertainty? Is it getting the best out of the individuals in your team? Is it thinking about and building a future strategy? Or is it coaching a diverse group of people? Which of those for you is the most pressing issue at the moment? I'll give you a couple of seconds just to click the right answer. Oh, pretty much a good split. So 20% of people saying it's their own resilience and well-being, 25% navigating change and uncertainty, 25% getting the best out of individuals, 23% building future strategy, and coaching diverse teams. We've got that sussed. Only 8% of the group are saying that's a big challenge at the moment. So we'll try and cover most of those things off during this quick overview. So I'll skip through my slides and move on to the next point. Okay, so the first insight then that I wanted to share from our digital library was an interview that I carried out with a fascinating guy called Dr. John Coates. He was the head of trading at Goldman Sachs in New York for a number of years, had a really successful career, but became so fascinated in why the traders were changing their risk-taking profiles based on their emotions just as much as they were by reading the market fluctuations. So he's written some fascinating research about mindset and risk-taking, especially in a trading environment. And his book, for those that are interested in this field, is called The Hour Between Dog and Wolf. So in this particular insight from our interview, John talks about some of the factors in the working environment that create the stress response. So a fascinating insight there with that holy trinity of the stress response: novelty, uncertainty, and uncontrollability. And when those three things are in play, it can create the stress response in our environment. So leaders have got a critical role to play here in, first of all, understanding that those elements in the macro environment, whether it's Brexit or digital disruption or people like Amazon disrupting the retail space, all of those things are largely out of our control. The key thing is our response to those things. So the weaker leader would be sharing all of that sort of, catastrophizing with their team and making everyone panic and throwing more sort of chaotic ideas into the mix. But the best leaders are the ones that are resilient enough to be able to understand those things are out of their control, to be able to absorb that uncertainty and that novelty, and to be able to almost filter it out and create a calmer microclimate underneath them, which has shorter term goals, positive language, real clarity around the short-term strategic objectives, and a positive language. This critical element of not worrying and stressing everyone, but actually seeing these as healthy challenges that the company can adapt to. So I think that's one of the key elements that we look at when we think about resilient leadership. And the reason this is so important is because our brain was built 50,000 years ago, and it was actually built for safety. It was built for survival. So to sort of get the adrenaline and the cortisol from the saber-toothed tiger coming around the back of the cave or whatever, we'd have that sort of fight and flight and freeze response. And even though the context has changed dramatically, our physical and emotional response is just the same. So we get the butterflies in the stomach, the blood's trying to leave our digestive system to get into our muscles ready to run. The blood leaves our palms as we don't want to lose our blood in combat, so we get sweaty palms. Our vision narrows down because there would only have been one predator rather than a herd. So this ability to become quite stubborn under pressure is something that we still see in this elevated heart rate, all of those symptoms that we get when we get into that stressed environment. Now, those things were previously there as cavemen to protect our lives, but actually now we're having exactly the same physiological and emotional response to protect our self-esteem, to protect our reputation and our image, which are all important in the working environment these days. So we've got to understand that our instinct when we get put into a stressful situation will probably be to stay safe. Now, this balance is absolutely critical between the challenge that we see in the environment and the perceived coping skills that we think we've got. And if things are in balance, that's all great. This is the zone or that flow state that we've read about. But actually what we often see in the corporate environment, and I definitely felt on that night in India, was that the challenge was starting to outstrip my coping skills. So on the right-hand side of this equation for me in India, this was the biggest crowd I'd ever played in front of, 120,000 people. I'd played in front of 25,000 before, but this was a big game. This was a pivotal part of the match. This is one of the biggest games of our calendar year. So this was the biggest day of my life in my own head. And at the same time, on that left-hand side, my negative voice, which was trying to protect me and take me back to safety, was saying, you're not good enough to be here. You've never played against India before. You've never won a game in this pressure for England. What makes you think you can do it now? And that's where we get this sort of short-term emotional hijack that then makes us make a stupid, rash decision, which for me was playing a ridiculous slug shot, much the commentators discussed. But for you, it could be, sending that late-night email to a client, or even worse, to your boss, which you regret later on. So I think it's really understanding how we simplify the right-hand side and how we stay connected to our past successes on the left-hand side. And this voice in our head will always be present. So these are some of the key insights. I won't play the audio from these just now because we don't have time, but Tara Swart, one of the UK's top neuroscientists, talks about how even just the negative thought train that we often get actually starts to lay down pathways in our brain which form tomorrow's instinct. So I used to think that this negative voice being self-critical was just a puff of smoke, but it's actually laying down physical structures that become tomorrow's habits and become tomorrow's instincts. So when we get the call to make a speech or raise a question in a webinar or present to the board, our brain is already telling us that there's this sort of broadband connection that we've ingrained over years to say, no, that will result in public shame, stay safe, stay in your comfort zone and don't go there. And these become our habits, which we definitely at the start of a new year need to spring clean and just check that are we just playing it safe, and is that really where we want to live? Another insight that I often share is from Sir Dave Brailsford, and he talks brilliantly about everyone having these dream goals, these wonderful ideas of what great looks like, but they lose that ability to move from saying they want to be the Olympic champion and actually breaking that down into the controllable processes and drivers that it takes on a daily basis to achieve those goals. So, for example, if you imagine a pyramid at the top, we might say that the dream is to be break Usain Bolt's record. Now he's retired. Underneath that, we need a performance goal, something tangible, a time or a weight or a P&L that we're going to use to measure ourselves against rather than an intangible dream. So 9.6 seconds might be the performance goal. And then we start thinking, okay, what's it going to take to get 9.6 seconds? And that might be in sport, physical, mental, tactical, and technical drivers, which as we move down through the pyramid, then we get more and more control over. So it becomes things like weight training, physical elements that we need a nutrition plan, we need a weight training plan, we need a flexibility plan. And the physical component then breaks down into those daily routines, which if I complete those daily routines with consistency and discipline, then it helps me to get more and more confidence. It gets more traction towards those weekly goals. So if I can have a gold medal day, I can have a gold medal week, a gold medal month, and a gold medal quarter, and a gold medal year. But so often we get sort of put off by the outcome. We worry about our sales target, and all we talk about is winning and losing. And that creates that emotional response that we heard about from the first insight, where it's out of our control. So our micro behaviors, our habits, our routines, our structures, those things on a daily basis are where Olympic gold medals are made. And our results, our performance doesn't rise to the level of our hopes. It drops down to the level of our habits on a daily basis. So if you're leading a team, we really need to be looking for the gold medal habits that are going to deliver performance this year and really focus on those in a disciplined way, and the results should take care of themselves. I think one of the other key things about personal resilience is this understanding that if we are going to be this energetic leader that's going to absorb some of the uncertainty and uncontrollability out in the environment, then we need to be well rested. And I think one of the key areas of competitive advantage I've seen in elite sport is not working harder, but it's actually recovering better. And Dorian Dugmore is one of the medical doctors that looks after the Premier League football managers. And he talks about the importance of senior leaders in business having health KPIs in the same way that we would have KPIs and P&L, EBITDA figures for all of our businesses. Have we got those same personal KPIs? Because without monitoring our own choices, our own nutrition, our own sleep, on our own exercise, we're never going to have the resilience and the personal energy that we need to be able to share across our organizations and to lead them through the challenges of 2020. So I think that's a really, really important thing to think about in terms of building out your own resilience in the months ahead. The second key part of this, moving aside from our own personal resilience, is how we start to create the environment for our teams. And I think when this level of pressure and uncertainty and uncontrollability is in the workplace, we get this sort of undeniable urge to micromanage the environment. And this is a great insight from Baroness Sue Campbell. She was a top netball coach. She became the head of all the coaching in the UK. So she saw all the Olympic coaches come through, and then she came up into the head of UK sport. And now she's got a job with the Women's FA. So she's been a brilliant change agent, a brilliant executive at sport across England. But this insight talks about a mistake she made in her own coaching philosophy that I think many of the audience today will be able to relate to, about managing and micromanaging your team under pressure.
Example I often use is a guy called Jim Greenwood, who coached rugby here many years ago. And I thought I was a great coach, but I was a show-off. You know, my best tracksuit, yelling at everybody, very didactic, very telling. You know, netball, you know, it was like guns going off. I was incredibly, you know, at them. And Jimmy coached rugby and on the same night as me, so he would watch me coach, and then I would watch him coach. And I thought he was terrible. This was asking questions. I was like, come on, Jim, you can read books. You know, what's the matter with you? And it was only after a lot of dialogue, he once asked me a really important question. Where do you sit when the game starts? Which I thought was a rather silly question at the time. And he said, well, on the bench. And he just nodded at me. So I said, who makes all the decisions during the game then? And I said, well, the players. He says, and when do they get a chance to practice that? With all your telling? I said, they don't. He said, no, exactly. So, you know, he turned my coaching into being a questioning coach. That doesn't mean to say you don't know where you're taking things. You know, there's that facilitation where you just start asking lots of questions. And there's the facilitation which helps someone go on a journey. So you're very clear what the journey is, but you've got to help the athlete take that journey for themselves, not take over that journey. I think the moment you take over that journey, you've actually disabled the athlete from achieving what they might do.
I do love that insight, and Sue's so honest there about you know, a human failing. We want everything to be perfect, and we want everyone to win because this team represents me, so I want it to be right. But in micromanaging it and grabbing it too tight, we actually stop the players from thinking for themselves, or our sales team, or our executives in our board, whatever it might be. And that limits our potential. You know, if we have got uncertainty and complexity, we need fresh ideas and fresh thinking, and the diversity and the cognitive diversity in our teams is going to be absolutely critical and you know, to solving these problems. But if all we do is try and make things perfect for this week or this next financial reporting quarter, then actually we're not going to accelerate and unlock the potential in our team. So I think this ability to not only let go ourselves and delegate and create a meeting environment where other people can talk more than us and come up with ideas, that's going to be critical. But also creating the psychological safety for people to make mistakes. You know, our babies and toddlers toddle before they walk. You know, we don't see them fall to the floor as they come across the sort of the hall to try and grab us. And when they fall, we don't say, that's it, we've got a non-walker here. We have a bit more faith and a bit more patience. We put our arms out and we give them confidence to take one extra step and to keep moving forward. And I think if we take that environment into our businesses in the year ahead, then we're much more likely to get the very best out of the individuals and help them to grow, which will actually deliver sustainable performance rather than just short-term accuracy. So I've definitely seen this comparison between Premier League football, for example. I've supported a couple of teams where there's so much money at stake every week that the management tends to be more directive. You know, this is how we're going to play. You need to stand here. You know, we're going to work in this particular way. And it's very much focused around plan A. Whereas working in rugby, I saw particularly with Eddie Jones, this picture here with a football, a rugby ball, a sort of an almond-shaped ball. He'd got a tennis ball in his pocket and a cricket ball that was one of his favourites. And he sort of puts the teams into simulated situations that they may never face on the pitch so that they became able to respond in a thoughtful way or a considered way rather than an emotional reaction to the novelty and the shock of a particular tactic. So I think we can do this. We can spend time with our team simulating new situations. So an example I worked with one of my clients last year was the Facebook data scandal with Cambridge Analytica was an easy one to sort of read in the newspaper and then go about your business. But actually starting to put that up as a scenario in your own business, get a group of people into the boardroom and say, okay, news is just broken that we've had a data breach in our business. Lock the doors, switch your phones off. We need to spend 30 minutes thinking about it. How would we respond? What would our key messages be? How do we make sure this never happens to us? Those kind of ideas and brainstorming situations can actually really start to build creativity and collaboration across the team that could be really valuable when a real novel opportunity or scandal breaks and you need to think quickly on your feet. So I think that ability to empower people and get them to think through problem solving is going to be absolutely critical. We need to have this sort of experimental mindset that I'll come into in a moment. And what I also saw with England Rugby was this ability to have very, very fast feedback loops. I think Eddie had been studying the military and seeing these hot debriefs. So after every training session, you get this very quick debrief situation while it's front of mind. And I think in the corporate arena, we're definitely seeing these feedback cycles tighten rather than being the annual appraisal. So this ability to prepare, do, review, learn very quickly and then adapt is absolutely where we're going to be able to make sure that we use these mistakes or opportunities as pivot points and to be able to move very quickly to accelerate past our competition. And part of this means being aware of what's going to happen in the future. And I got a chance to work with May Bush, who used to be the CEO of Morgan Stanley Europe, but she's now an executive coach. And this is one of her insights about how she advises businesses and individuals to start thinking about future-proofing their careers and their organizations.
You need to create a culture and an environment that allows people to make those shifts, allows for new and innovative ways of operating or even new branches of the business to bubble up. And that's really creating an environment where people feel free to innovate, to be creative, and to raise new possibilities. And most importantly, you want to create an environment where people can not only share their big ideas with you as the managers, but also have the chance to experiment with them. Experiment to me means taking the smallest possible step that doesn't bet the whole company, but allows you to get some information about whether or not that's the right track. So you always want to be having experiments. They're like little speedboats. You know, even if you're on a super tanker, you got to have those little speedboats going out to explore what the next lands are going to be, and then be able to start shifting yourself in time. So those are some of the things that I think people need to be doing in organizations, in teams, in companies, and even in your own career, to be able to be fleet-footed and take advantage of future opportunities and really future-proof your organization, your unit, and your own professional life.
So I love that idea there that even with the biggest corporates, we see how they're going to pivot their strategy is through partnering with some smaller startups, for example. That's an example for them of those speedboat strategies and those experiments. And it was interesting also meeting Mark Spellman, who's used to be the head of the MD of strategy at Accenture, and he's now on the future of the Connected City panel at the Davos organization. So a fascinating guy. And he was talking about these three timelines or timeframes that we've got to be aware of. So he spoke about the understanding that Horizon 3, sort of 5 to 10 years out, we know is going to be very different. So we can imagine these sort of automated cars in the environment. We know that Horizon 1 is going to be about, can we hit our P&L targets for this month or for this quarter or for this year? So we've got our emails, our projects, our sort of recruitment hires that we're focused on at the moment. But both of those the most important of these is Horizon 2, because if we don't start these experiments that Mae Bush was talking about, if we don't start thinking about how we can prepare ourselves for Horizon 3 with some projects, some investments, some partnerships, some new ideas, if we can't test and learn in that Horizon 2 space, then we're never going to know which of those is mature enough or productive enough to be able to invest in down the line, so that we become future-proof and we're able to move with agility into that future strategy. So I think it's really interesting for us to think about, if we want to be in a competitive space in Horizon 3, then we can't just focus on that first immediate horizon that's in front of us. I ran a session for a number of high-profile football managers recently, several of whom were out of work. And as is the way, I think they have a shortening tenure more and more. So we were talking about if we know that the game of football, for example, is becoming more diverse, more international, and we know that the mindset of players is going to be critical, and we know that understanding them culturally and being able to communicate with the different cultures, if we know that those are trends that are growing in Horizon 3, yes, we should be looking for the new job in Horizon 1, but actually Horizon 2 might mean that we start to learn Spanish, we start to learn French, we start to understand how psychology can be brought into the dressing room and into our own management, so that we are a future-proof leader and we can work around the world rather than just looking for jobs in the UK. So I'm sure you can find ways, whether it's Horizon 3 and financial services being, a completely disrupted digital business, and Horizon 1 being the high street banks. Horizon 2 is these partnerships with these new innovative payment schemes, or these new cards that are or cryptocurrencies that are being employed, and investing time, money and people into Horizon 2 is a great way to start to think about future-proofing both your own careers and your business unit that you're currently working in. So it's interesting for you to think about what those projects might be for you in Horizon 2, for the goals that you're setting yourself for your own business and your own career. And obviously happy to take any questions on those particular issues as well. So just as a summary before we go to the questions, I started to talk about the importance of mindset. I think it is the next frontier. I think we've done so much in analytics. I think we've done so much in technology. I think the last thing that we can measure is what's going on in people's heads. And I think talking more about mental health, talking more about the high performance mindset is going to be critical, and actually having these tools and techniques to deliver it more sustainably and more consistently in our environment is critical. To do that, we've got to understand that novelty, uncertainty, and uncontrollability are push us back into our comfort zone. Our brain was built for safety. We need to buck that trend. We need to be courageous and take on risks, calculated risks. We need to stay connected to our strengths and our confidence. We need a great team around us, and we need to communicate with clarity and positive language with shorter term goals to make sure that our teams can deliver in that climate of high challenge. Then we need to think about, I can't do this on my own. I need to give away power into my team. I need to empower my team to think more, to problem solve more, to be more creative, so that I'm actually decentralizing the leadership away from myself and I don't become the bottleneck of all the issues and all the decision making. We've actually got leaders being created beneath me so that we can move faster, we can be more creative, and we can be more agile. And then the final element was around, how do I start to set up experiments? How do I make sure my Friday afternoons every week are working on future projects? How do I make sure that I invest 4% of our revenue this year on a particular piece of technology or whatever it might be? How do I start to carve out that time, talent and investment to make sure that we're ready to get ahead of our competitors and exploit any opportunities that might come down the line? So that's a quick overview of some of the mindset elements from both a personal perspective a team perspective and how you can future-proof your organization. So I'll be thrilled to take your questions. So maybe, Gemma, you can start us off.
Hi, Jeremy. We've had some, I do have a couple of questions of my own, but we've had some really good ones come through. And I'd like to ask you a question from Matthew that came through around the time that you introduced insights from Dr. Tara Swart, the neuroscientist.
Yeah.
So Matthew's question is, I've seen examples where leaders fear that their people don't fully understand the existential threat that external organizations and disruptors pose to their business and potentially their jobs, so they don't use positive language, instead trying to impress the gravity of the situation. How would you handle those situations where your organization or team is lacking pace and urgency because they don't seem to understand how serious the situation is?
Yeah, it's a really good point. So I think the first thing is that novelty, uncertainty, and uncontrollability, if you're in a very, very stable environment and you're lacking creativity and engagement and enthusiasm, those can be thrown in to actually spark some creativity. So they can be used to positive effect rather than being negative. So that's probably the first thing to say. And then on Matt's point, I think he's absolutely right that sometimes we do need the burning platform. We're often motivated by avoiding failure rather than sort of seeking out hedonism and the spoils of victory. So we do need that sharp sort of cattle prod sometimes to say, if we don't do this, we're going to go out of business. And I think there are a number of case studies that we've seen with Netflix and Blockbuster and whatever, not taking that jump early enough. So I think those kind of scenario planning opportunities are there. That need to be put in place. I think when that's put together with a rational plan, so there's some data that shows the trends, it's not just an emotional reaction, it's almost like a business case. When that's put forward, it's absolutely critical. Then that can start to influence the sort of stories or the insights from clients can often be a catalyst for it as well, that their trends are changing. There's that sort of boiling frog analogy, isn't there? That if you throw a frog into boiling water, it'll jump straight out. But if you stick it into cold water and warm it up slowly, then it won't notice the change and it'll boil to death. I've never tried that one, so don't worry. But it's the same principle. And I think sometimes we need to have this ability to look up and out of our organization rather than just down and in and be stuck in that horizon one accuracy. We've got to be prepared for it to be a little bit messy, and we've got to try and embrace the reality of what's going on there, which is a lot of disruption. So I wish Matt well with that, and I think the balance of rational data, client insight in the changing trends, and a powerful story from within would be a good recipe for influencing those stakeholders that are being stubborn. And often it's acknowledging that there's fear in play. People have got financial shares, emotional shares, financial shares, intellectual shares in the strategy that you've put in place over the last 3 to 5 years. So to suddenly pivot and say we're going to do something different takes humility and vulnerability, which is not always seen in very senior leaders that are under pressure. So that's why that ability to have a psychological safety and support as well as the challenging environment is absolutely critical.
And that stubbornness under pressure that you referenced towards the beginning of the webinar.
Yeah, absolutely. You become very blinkered.
Yeah. Thank you. I have a question about identity and about career transition. So one of the challenges that we support leaders on when they come on our programs is they're great at delivering. And they have developed a reputation in their organization as being good at delivering execution. And then they get rewarded for that performance, and suddenly their role changes and they become leaders of people rather than attached to the delivery that they enjoyed and had success in previously. And they struggle sometimes with that changing identity and the change in role. So you've had some interesting career transitions yourself in sport, going from athlete to coach and psychologist. So how was that transition for you? And do you have any reflections looking back that might help some of these leaders?
Yeah, well, I'm flattered you thought I was an athlete for a start. A long time ago. But yeah, I think certainly in sport, the transition is critical. I think one sports psychologist said that athletes are the only people to die twice. They lose this athletic identity that's so much around their strength and their sport and their vitality, maybe in their 30s, sometimes younger. I retired at 35. And I tried to make that transition more seamless by studying at the same time that I was captain at Leicester and sort of stepping down from my career. So I actually retired into a job because I'd already done my master's degree, which I think helped me because I'd seen so many sort of drop off a cliff, in terms of their skills and their confidence and their identity. But I think we've got to see ourselves as more than what we do. So many people in suburbia go to the dinner party and everyone says, "Oh, what's your name?" And very quickly, they can't wait to say, "What do you do?" To see if it's of any worth to them. But I think we need to see ourselves as more than that. Our workplace is the only place we get measured and valued. So if the only place I can show my sales target or score goals or earn money is quantifiable is in my business or in my sporting career, then I invest more of my energy, my emotional identity into that space. Yet I'm still a brother, I'm still a father, I'm still a son, I'm still a mentor, I'm still representing a charity, I'm still a friend to people. And those 6 or 7 different elements should be like a balanced share portfolio rather than just investing all of my identity into a high risk hedge fund, if you like. So I think when people make transitions, we've got to move away from the idea that we're only valued because we were the head of sales. Yes, we delivered great revenue into the business or great technical expertise into the business, but actually we've got brilliant planning skills, we've got great interpersonal skills, we've got great strategic thinking, we've got great problem solving, we've got great focus. And those are the kind of skills purely in the working domain that we can translate absolutely as we move across into that next identity. And we should probably think about this idea of the impact we have on other people as much as the impact we have on the business. So I think very often, again, we see, here's my sales figures, but actually what's the impact I'm having on the community, the graduates in my business, the team around me? If all we're doing is smashing particular targets and the casualties left in our wake, then that's not a great definition of success. And I think certainly going forward, that human element of leadership is going to be a critical skill.
Thank you. I've got a question about gender here. And what differences in approach in terms of mindset do you notice from a gender perspective? Because you've interviewed around 100 people for your digital library.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think we're really passionate about trying to inspire female leaders. I'm really keen to interview the best female leaders. I've got some fascinating content with a strategy professor from London Business School, the head of Sandhurst Military Academy, and the head of the Royal Ballet in New York. Fascinating ladies that have really created high performance environments. I guess the key thing is to certainly a lot of the very successful women that we've interviewed have had a very positive role model early on in their careers. Often that's been a father figure that said, anything is possible. And they believe that there are no barriers, there is no glass ceiling. And I think, the key thing about this mindset that we've researched is that you're running your own race. You shouldn't compare yourself to negatively to other people. I think often there's a sort of, we lose our confidence when we say, I'm sitting here, I'm being hard on myself, I'm not backing myself for these jobs. And when I look into the social media sphere, I've got, this person's got a brilliant CV, this person's influential, this person dresses immaculately, this person is a fantastic communicator, and this person's so well connected. And we almost look at everybody else's strengths and compare that to our weaknesses. Yet actually we've got incredible strengths and they've got weaknesses. It's just that the sort of social environment doesn't tend to balance it that way. So I think the key thing for me is having a clear plan of what you want to achieve, making sure that you've got a great network around you, and that you almost create a dream team around you and spring clean your friends and contacts to say who are the people who are going to be positive influences, and a great route to market. You know, we're a coffee away from brilliant influential decision makers, so let me focus my time on getting to those people and picking their brains rather than being negative and saying this isn't possible. So I think it's that really proactive mindset that I hope people will take into 2020.
You're reminding me a little bit of our research that we did on imposter feeling, and one of the big themes, or one of the big triggers, is that sense of social comparison, and you're always comparing yourself with your subjective perceptions of what others are doing and doing well or not well. And you also reminded me as well of our latest podcast with Matthew Fosh, who's a chairman in the insurance sector, who talked about leading and by focusing on the one or two things that you're really good at. So you've not become a CEO because you're good at everything. You've become CEO because you're really good at one or two things. So focus on those and then get others around you to do the things that you're not as good at.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been fascinated, and this is why I'm really interested in meeting these top stars, because so often we read in the newspapers that they're bulletproof, get everything right, and they're perfect. But actually, when you get to meet them and work with them, it's often that vulnerability and that not knowing what to do. And I think that's a key driver for the next 5 to 10 years. Technology is driving change so quickly that we can't possibly have all the answers. We can't possibly even know what's going to happen. So to pretend we do would be completely false and erode trust. So I think I've tried to get the honest secrets, a bit like Sue Campbell's point, you know, I got this wrong, you know. I think that builds trust much more, and we can take our teams with us when we're honest and authentic.
Absolutely. Yeah. A couple more questions have come through in the last few minutes. Firstly, from Ewan, is reacting to emotions per se a bad thing in good leadership?
Reacting to your own emotions, well, I suppose your own emotions are a signal that something is clashing with your values. So if you're ecstatic, it means because you value this new sale and you judge yourself by the commercial returns or whatever. Or if it's somebody has let you down or broken your trust, that might flare up anger, you know, and disappointment in it. So I think your emotions are critical, but I think the key for skillful leaders is to harness them. So we often think about that gap between stimulus and response being the choice. So the fact somebody cuts you up on the motorway, if you like, you get a choice. Do you sort of put your foot down and go screaming after them with gesticulations through the window, or do you actually back off by 50 yards and say, actually, that person's having a pretty bad day. You know, I'm going to stay in control of my emotions here and do the right thing for my journey. And that's often easier said than done in the working environment. But I think, you know, one thing that's really helpful is, you know, when we talk about our values, it can be quite intangible to understand, but our emotions really are the flags that sit on top of them to say that was significant for me, good or bad. And I think that ability just to reflect at the end of the day, again, a lot of people use a journal and that kind of tool to say, you know, what did I do well today? What were my flashpoints today? Because we're trying to move from reacting emotionally to having greater awareness so that we gain greater control. Now, it may be at times we do need to show our frustration and our anger about a particular issue, but it needs to be done in a controlled way rather than being completely reactive. So if we start to get awareness, a bit like a food diary, if you like, oh, I always feel a little bit ill after I've eaten those things, or I always feel a little bit angry after those things have happened. By making a note of those things, we see the trends, and the trends create the awareness, and the awareness then creates the choice in our next phase of play, if you like, that, you know, we're about to go into a meeting with that person that usually winds me up. What are the kind of triggers that could spark my emotions and allow me and sort of compromise my own performance? if I'm going into a meeting saying, if he or she says this, I'm not going to jump across the table, you've already started to get hold of it. So yeah, that's probably a strategy I'd use.
Thank you. I've got 4 minutes left on my clock, and there's another question that's just come in, so I'll jump on this one. It's from Mike. What are the keys to managing or influencing upwards within an organization, in your view?
Yeah, very, very good question, and I think they're the same. They're the same as down, really, but slightly more subtle. I think obviously we can use our power and authority to push change down through our team, but it needs to be much more of a pull when we look up. So I think the best thing is really try and understand the mindset and the motivation of our senior leaders. Try and understand what they value. Do they want to look good? Do they want to make more money? Do they want to look good in front of their team? Do they want to be seen as the wise one, the creative thinker? And sometimes we have to play a subservient role into that. I've worked with particular elite coaches and elite stars with massive egos, and you have to leave the sort of breadcrumbs and the sort of trail for them with ideas and suggestions, and this person did that, and that's a good idea that they're doing, and this is interesting, we've got a bit of a problem with that, and let them come up with the spark of the genius idea that comes into their mind. And of course it's their idea after a few subtle hints, and when it's their idea it moves forward. So I think the influencing of the burning platform, the social proof of other people, what they are doing, ticking a few of those motivational boxes for the leader above you, I think is a critical, more subtle game to play, rather than trying to hammer away and get frustrated yourself. So yeah, good luck with that one.
Thank you. And thanks, Mike, for that question. We're just about out of time. Yes, 2 minutes to 1. So I'd like to thank you, Jeremy, for joining us today. It's been absolutely fascinating. I've got pages and pages of notes and questions of my own that I haven't had a chance to ask. But thank you, everyone, for joining us and getting involved, and Jeremy for your input. We'll be following up with all of you with a link to the recording. And Jeremy, you have some further information to share about some of your programs, one of which is starting on the 17th. So that's next week. Is it week after next? So I'll be sharing some details of that. Is there anything you'd like to add about that, Jeremy?
No, that's it. I mean, we've obviously got a huge digital library here. You only saw the audio or heard the audio, but if anyone's got any questions to follow up or wants access to any content, then give me a shout, and I'd love to keep in touch.
Thank you. And similarly, if you're wondering what the icons are at the bottom of this slide here, that's a very broad overview of the Alchemy Suite, which is the School for CEOs offering, and on how we support senior leaders. So if you're interested to learn a little bit more about any of those, then please do fire me an email. I'd love to talk to you about it. Our next webinar is taking place in the beginning of April, details of which are available on our website. And that is on becoming an inclusive leader. So we're going to be giving you hints and tips on how to develop a more inclusive leadership style. And we hope to welcome you back then. Thanks, everyone. Have a fantastic weekend. And thank you again, Jeremy.